thank you very much for joining us today on CISO Talks. Perhaps if you wouldn't mind just taking a brief moment just to explain a bit about, what your organization does and the value that you guys provide to CISOs. That'd be really helpful if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. My name is Paul Katzoff. I'm the CEO here at WhiteCanyon Software. Our flagship product is WhiteDrive. We are a secure data erasure, drive erasure program. We're used on all sorts of IT assets, mobile devices, laptops, servers, workstations, you name it, we're there to erase it. We've been doing this for 22 years. We started back in 1998 with a little 3.5-inch floppy diskette, and we've been happily in this industry ever since.
So this pandemic, what's it actually meant for you guys? What's been your experience of what this means for security teams?
The pandemic has added some new variables to how you manage data and data security on the corporate level. Corporations out there have been spending millions of dollars to protect their corporate networks. And all of a sudden, within 2 or 3 weeks, you had 95% of your workforce work remote from their home Wi-Fi networks. And some of them moved to home devices. Some of them didn't have work laptops that they got assigned. And so now you have these employees working from home. They are accessing your data through VPN tunnels and possibly saving this data to home computers that aren't necessarily protected with the typical intrusion detection alerts and other things that your network has, and that data is out there. So for data security officers and CISOs out there, there's this concern and worry that this is going to come back and bite them. The move happened very quickly. Business went on for the most part, but there is this vulnerability out there now, and a lot of different agencies and organizations are working hard to fix those, if possible.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've definitely seen the same here. Is that we saw obviously initially when it first happened there was the obvious shift to survival, to actually get businesses and allowing businesses to continue to trade. But I think obviously now we're at that stage where we're like, right, okay, well, we've figured out a way which we can actually continue to work in this way. I'd like to say that a lot of companies have put in place their disaster recovery plans, but I think actually more realistically, companies built their disaster recovery plans as the pandemic ensued. But I think that the next step was absolutely like security, and I think we've been definitely seeing this quite a significant shift and a real trend of organizations talking about this concept of, well, there are no borders. And we've been talking about zero trust for quite some time. This is not a new concept, but I think that this entire sort of situation has led to that being made much more poignant and much more relevant. And I think that certainly that reliance on perhaps some of this traditional siloed security that organizations have traditionally put in place has really been shown up here. And I think that the way that a lot of security professionals have had to think about their data security in particular, I think has really had to change. And I think that this, in some ways, this has been the shift that's been needed to start thinking about data in a slightly different way, start thinking about security in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And these poor CISOs, I mean, you've thought through every scenario out there. You've worked hard for your firewall. You've worked hard for everything you can. And all of a sudden you get a curveball saying you can't go into your offices anymore. Like, right. Who could have planned ahead for that? Who was ready for that day where we're not allowed to go into our physical offices and we all have to work remote? And how do you jump to that level? You know, the management executive teams are like, okay, let's keep, like you said, let's keep business going. And so you have employees work remote. You get green lights to do VPNs to home computers. You get all this kind of access and ability. And all of a sudden, on the data security side, your CISOs, the CDOs are kind of looking at this going, I know there's going to be issues, but we have to keep business going. What are we going to do to mitigate those problems in the future or our vulnerabilities or liabilities? And how do we do that now that we might be in a remote work environment for, I don't know, another year?
Who knows? Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean, it's an impossible situation in every context, whatever job you're in. I mean, to try and plan for this. I remember one, I was sat there back in March. We're like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
How is this going to play out? And it's impossible for anyone to contemplate what this actually means. I think that for some of the smaller organizations, they're perhaps a bit more, they are a bit more agile, and perhaps, the startups are sort of a bit more used to the cloud. I think for some of the larger organizations, the larger enterprises that have got all of this legacy approaches, these legacy ways of doing things, I think the pain was particularly present there. That's certainly what we saw as well. So I think it's really forced the hand of sort of digital transformation in places where it frankly should have been happening quicker anyway. And I think that's probably a positive out of this whole situation as well.
It is. There's a positive spin to all this. There are some organizations that already had remote workforce teams. They already had work laptops assigned. They already had the VPN set up. They're already in a safe place and safe location to do this kind of transition. And they just moved more of their employees into that system, and they just assigned laptops and other devices to them. We work with a lot of secondhand refurbishers that erase computers and laptops, and they weren't allowed to go into their factories or into their warehouses to process their systems, but their inventory sold out. I mean, refurbished systems, secondhand systems, that market from March till I'd say June, they lost almost 100% of their inventory. That's just the size of corporations making purchases, families making purchases for their children who had to do school at home. Yeah. And so you had this whole move into what we see as this remote workforce. And, on our side, it's a good thing. It definitely is a good thing. It is the future. I think hybrid's probably the best. I think there's a lot of studies coming out. I forget which one I saw today, but it was about productivity and just had questions and issues with productivity working from home. So I think they're actually probably going to come with a kind of a hybrid workforce of, 2 days in the office so that you can your meetings, do the in-person connections, all that kind of stuff, and then 3 days remote a week, something to that effect. I think we'll see what they say.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, do you think that this overall has been a positive, would you say, for data security, or do you think the risks have made it a real problem? I mean, what's your view? Do you think it's actually been a positive exercise in some ways for data security?
The stretch is positive. The vulnerabilities are definitely a negative, but the stretch to allow this to happen in the future and to be able to manage it, and the systems and processes you have to have in place and your data security policy updates, all that is all positive for companies that have never addressed it and had never wanted to. There's a lot of corporations that don't want, ours included, that didn't want a remote workforce. You focus on just having your employees in the office, and now with this change, you have to address it. You have to come up with solutions. You have to limit your liabilities, all those kinds of points, and in the end, come out with a result that works for your organization, no matter what happens. You have to turn into a flexible organization, I believe.
Yeah, no, I think it's been a very interesting exercise when you look at these risks. I mean, I was reading recently an article that said that the information security threats had increased by sort of 46% or something since the beginning of the pandemic. I've actually also read a study that said that they decreased, actually. So it depends on what study you ultimately read here. But I think probably the nature of some of these threats, in particular when we think about phishing, and they've probably been geared up very much to capitalize on people's concern and vulnerability around and curiosity and interests, but I don't know whether the net number of threats is necessarily up or not. I've not yet managed to get to the bottom of exactly what the truth is behind those kind of stats, but I think that it's definitely has been a very challenging time. I think certainly it's, from what we've seen, there are definitely people taking advantage of the chaos. We've seen cyber criminals taking advantage of the situation that, there is this state of disarray, and it is not business as normal, and that is the perfect conditions for cyber criminals, frankly. So I think that it would be, so we've definitely seen some more severe attacks. In fact, we saw that one on Universal Health recently with the ransomware, and that's total opportunistic. They realized that there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of carnage happening at the moment, and that was very much taking advantage of the situation. And I've definitely seen more of those. I don't know whether that's been your experience as well.
On our side, we think it's going to increase overall. I think you're right. There's, some taking advantage of this opportunity to kind of attack and use it as a springboard to get into the organizations. I think if you take a step back and look at it, it's the value of the data or the value of the information or the attack that they could do is what's driving all of this. And some of these hackers may realize in order to get the ransomware into these organizations, there's the firewalls and all that kind of data security, or the security side is up to date, but let's attack a home user, get into their system. They're going to VPN in, and then they can push us into their network. There's other methodologies and things that they're going to start looking at to try and use this opportunity to get in, like you mentioned. Now, whether they've gone up tremendously or they're stagnant or decreasing, I think it's just a wave. Maybe they didn't have internet access at home either, and these hackers had to work from home, and so they didn't have the ability to do it. I'm joking on that, but overall, it's going to keep increasing over the next couple of years. Data is going to become more important. As more of these organizations start paying out ransoms, they're going to see more people focusing on ransoms. I mean, if you can make 30 million in Bitcoin, how are you going to decrease the number of hackers that are out there trying to get that from you? And next is small organizations. If you can get in and get a small organization to give you $10,000, $20,000 for a dental office, they can afford it, and you can lock them down. They get afraid, they pay you, and you start focusing on kind of the smaller players. So I think it's going to spread, unfortunately. It's going to keep moving.